My name is Rebecca. As many of you know from my last video, I lost my husband to COVID-19 back a couple months ago, and I'm on a sailboat. We've been on a sailboat for 12 years together, and I've always wanted to sail around the world. I've always wanted the cruising lifestyle from probably about age 25, more than half of my adult life. I had just about given up on it. And was trying to get sailing out of my system to save my first marriage, but I didn't get it out of my system, and I just kept wanting to do it. And thank God I met Patrick. Thank God he was a sailor. Thank God he had already sailed around the world once. And lucky for me, he was willing to do it again with me. And so we set off 12, almost 13 years ago to go cruising, and we've been doing it ever since. And I'm a lucky woman to have been able to share that with him for the last 12 years. I just want to read you something. The northern indigenous villages of Australia. One of the villagers told her that the night someone dies, everyone in the village moves a piece of furniture or something else into their yard. The next day, when the bereaved family wakes up and looks outside, they see that everything has changed since their loved one died. Not just for them, but for everyone. That's how these communities witness and mirror grief. They are showing in a tangible way that someone's death matters, the loss is made visible. I think that the reason that I have been able to live and not crumble through this whole thing has been the tremendous support of my YouTube family, my real family back in the US, my friends, the friends that I've acquired in this marina and in South Africa and from all around the world as I've sailed the last 12 years. The support has been tremendous all the way around, and my grief has been really, really witnessed by probably hundreds of thousands of people, and most importantly, the people that are closest to me. So I think because Patrick's passing has not just affected me hugely, it's affected people around the world and people we've known and people that knew Patrick even before I knew Patrick. I think that that's been so hugely healing for me. And I hope that every single one of you that ever texted me or emailed me or called me knows that you played a tremendous part in my healing. But let's celebrate Patrick and his life together right now.
I am Carol, Patrick's younger sister. Patrick was a remarkable person. He loved to climb the trees in the front yard in Miami. In Indianapolis, every summer, Patrick built a tree house in the backyard in the big tree. Every year it was bigger and bigger. He grew vegetables in the back corner of the yard. He played for a while with the Little League. And he raised chickens that we would get from the state fair. In the wintertime, he would build tunnels, snow tunnels around the house. We moved back to Miami when Patrick was 13. Our house was on a very wide canal, which went to a lake. Patrick's best friend was Richard, who had a dinghy and a small outboard motor. So they would motor around the canal and the lake on their dinghy. Somewhere around this time, Patrick learned of Joshua Slocum and read his book. It inspired Patrick. Patrick and Rich began taking the dinghy to the ocean, and one day they surprised everyone using 2 55-gallon drums and some air tanks, raising a pre-Civil War anchor from the ocean floor. On another day, Patrick and Richard, with many and their little outboard, took the dinghy to Bimini and back. My father often talked about how he wanted to pinch Patrick's head off for that stunt, but he was also very proud of Patrick for having the audacity and chutzpah to complete the trip successfully. Apparently, Patrick started thinking more of the Slocum story. When he was in high school, he started building a big red and white ocean-going boat in the backyard. After some time there, he went to Colorado and worked in the molybdenum mines to raise money to buy his Catalina. When he was ready and he found his boat, he went to St. Thomas, and the rest is history. He told me about his first parachute jump years prior. It was fascinating to listen to him talk about the jump minute by minute, second by second. It's the only time I ever heard him say that he was terrified. went on to complete several more successful jumps. Patrick was right. Live your life to the fullest, since we never know when we will be taken. I truly expected him to live for many more years, with a book of his adventures and many speaking engagements in his old age. He was remarkable. He will be missed. Patrick, we loved you.
Hi, I'm Kathy Steenson. I am Patrick's older sister by about not quite 3 years. He was my buddy and confidant throughout school and even through our adult lives. He could not have been a better brother. When we were teenagers, our next door neighbor built a catamaran in his backyard, and that might have been the catalyst of Patrick's dream to build a boat himself. So he got to work on it, and he ended up building a 14-foot sailboat called Water Dog. So Patrick asked Ian to take the maiden run with him to go to Bimini. They set sail, but unfortunately hit a storm and lost the rudder as well as the mast and the communications equipment. So they were drifting. They eventually landed on some white sand, and they feared that they were in Cuba, but in actuality they landed in Stuart, Florida. My dad and I jumped in the car and ran up to get them, and when we arrived, the boat was being pulled out of the ocean by a large crane, actually. And then he built a 17-foot sailboat he called Juggernaut, and that was the boat he used on his first solo navigation. This time he built the boat in the garage of my parents' house. He feared nothing, and he dealt with problems as they appeared, making necessary repairs to keep going, and he eventually made his way back to Miami after circling the globe. I remember him saying that the worst part about the solo circumnavigation was the loneliness, having nobody to talk with, having nobody to share his experiences with. But the one time wasn't enough. He wanted to do it again. And this time he got backers and investors to build his boat called the Slippery Turtle. Unfortunately, on that boat, he got as far as the Galapagos Islands and hit the reefs, which tore up the boat. It didn't deter him, though. He hitched a ride back to the U.S. on a cruise ship and started yet again. My husband, my 2 children, and I followed Pat's adventures, fascinated by his bravery, his self-taught skills, and knowledge of sailing. We regaled at his tales of uncharted islands inhabited by non-English-speaking chiefs and natives, how they welcomed him and cared for him until he was ready to move on. His generosity endeared him to everybody he met. He was humble enough, though, that we did not learn about many of his good deeds until much later. In fact, just a week ago, a lady who lives about 18 miles from me contacted me to relate how 10 years ago she and her husband were living in the French Polynesian Islands and heard on their communication equipment that another boat that was far out to sea had sent out an SOS because they had lost their rudder and was drifting in the sea. Pat and Rebecca, his wife, had the natives on the island put together some wood for a new rudder, and then they sailed 3 days to reach this boat and attach the rudder to the boat. This was so like them, but I never heard the story until now. Rebecca says it was because of Patrick's heart. He was always the first to help where it was needed. I was the fortunate recipient of many of Patrick's benevolent acts. In 1984, he showed up in my hospital room in Spokane just after I had had open-heart surgery. He flew in from Rhode Island just to make sure I was okay and to secretly tell me that he was planning another solo circumnavigation. Patrick asked me to stop at a gas station. I did not need gas, and it was raining, but he insisted. Without a word, he walked inside and returned with new windshield wipers in his hands, which he immediately installed on my car. "You needed new ones," he said. It had been raining, and he wanted me to be safe. I must insert here that Patrick's bravery did not begin and end on the water. During his 2-year stint with the U.S. Army, he served in Vietnam. He must have experienced harrowing times, but he hid them inside, not wanting to sadden those who loved him. At some point, Patrick knew he needed a woman in his life, but not just any woman. She had to be brave, strong, and share the dream of a full-time life sailing. After a couple bumps in the road, he found Rebecca, his soulmate, his helpmate, his perfect complement to the life he envisioned. They worked hard and lived frugally to make it all happen. My husband and I were fortunate to attend their wedding on their newly named boat, Brick House. the day before they left on what was to be a 2 to 3 year trip around the world. At Patrick's passing, they neared a 13th year of marriage as well as a 13th year of living and sailing on Brick House. Together they had faced such things as Vietnamese pirates, fierce storms, uninhabited islands, Abu Saif kidnappings and beheadings of their sailing friends, gut-wrenching reactions to strange food, and then lockdown in South Africa weeks before Patrick's passing. But they also were privileged to experience the most beautiful land, seas, people, and creatures on lands and waters all around the world, and they appreciated every moment of that and lived it to the fullest. I cannot tell you how much my family and I will miss Patrick and the stories he lived. I cannot imagine how much Rebecca will miss her soulmate. Life will never be the same for her, but Patrick would want her to continue sailing. He would not want her to become stagnant, but to continue meeting the world head on. I have a feeling she will do just that, and do justice to what she and Patrick had, and never forget the life they had lived together. I am proud of my brother and all he did. I was blessed to be born into the same family as this man of integrity and bravery, as well as an adventurous soul, and to have been his friend as well as his sister. May God bless his soul and his wife, Rebecca.
When my daughter married Patrick, I knew she had truly found her soulmate. He had the same wanderlust in his heart as she did. He was a man she could always count on to support her. He worked hard to make sure their dream of travel would come true with his knowledge of sailing. His loss breaks Rebecca's heart as well as mine.
Hello, I'm Gareth Hughes. I'm a retired delivery skipper. When I started working with Hank Schmidt some years ago, Hank Schmidt of Offshore Passage Opportunities, I was surprised and excited to see Patrick Childress's name pop up. I knew Patrick, of course, because he was one of the first people to have sailed single-handed around the world. I think at the time he did it, there were less than 50 solo circumnavigators. When I eventually got to meet him, I was surprised to find that far from reacting like the celebrity he really was, he was humble and in fact a little taciturn until he had something worthwhile to say. To illustrate how humble he was, here's an anecdote. We were in Bermuda, and the boats we were delivering were about a mile apart. Patrick had problems with a shore power cable, which is an umbilical that allows you to charge the boat's batteries. He knew I carried a multimeter in my toolkit. So Patrick then carries the unwieldy, heavy shore power cable all the way to the boat I was skippering, solved the problem, and carried the cable back again. I asked him why on earth he did not borrow the multimeter, and he said he didn't want to bother me. It would not have bothered me in the least. We were meeting up for dinner that night anyway. Lately, I've enjoyed being a fly on the wall in the creation of the wonderful Brick House videos. I miss him already and don't expect that to change.
Talking of not forgetting, I won't forget that day in Hout Bay for a long time. I love that man more than anybody in the world, besides maybe his sister. His sister loved him a lot too. She brought us to a distillery here and in California, and it was a good day. Yep, Patrick's putting up the sail, doing what he loves most, besides maybe recording YouTube videos and trying to think about what to say next. Mike Wilson, 37 years ago, brought his bride to St. Thomas and found a brochure on a circumnavigator who had just arrived there in St. Thomas and was doing day sails and booze cruises and things like that. So they decided to go out with Patrick for a day sail. And then later, he found out that Patrick was doing a sail from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda and then on to St. Martin. So he was pretty excited to hook up with Patrick 37 years later, and it was fun meeting Mike. He had sailed on Juggernaut, and he had taken some videos, and this is Juggernaut, and this is Patrick inside of Juggernaut. Pretty unbelievable to have photos from 37 years ago on this Catalina 27 that Patrick had just finished sailing around the world. Look at that handsome man. Handsome then, handsome now. And there he is up in his element on the bow, tying on some sails. doing what he loves to do. So simple, so natural. Hey, and do you see those shorts? 37 years ago, he was wearing those shorts, and he wore those shorts for the first 5 years that we were on our circumnavigation. So yeah, he keeps his clothes for a long time. I think they eventually got used for oil rags. Look at him. The old-fashioned glasses, the old-fashioned hat. Yep, he likes his old-fashioned stuff, that's for sure, even then. So here we are with Mike going on the NARC rally to the Caribbean with Sail OPO. He's on a Swan 48, and there's Patrick with his gray hair. There's Mike with his gray hair 37 years later. And there they go. They're getting ready to navigate. And there's the 5 of us. I got to go on that trip too. And there's the 5 of us getting ready to head down to Newport. Yep, sailors' paths will cross again. And I do hope that mine crosses with Patrick's again someday.
Hi, we're Jan and Rich, and we lived and traveled on our sailboat Slipaway for a number of years. And we met Patrick and Rebecca in 2008 when we were both anchored in Isla Mujeres, Mexico.
And when we were in Isla Mujeres, Patrick and Rebecca came over to Slipaway for some drinks so we could share some stories about our past, get to know each other. And anyway, we mentioned we previously had owned a Catalina 27. I don't remember what exactly Patrick said, but it was something a little vague along the lines of, I heard there's a guy who's circumnavigated on a Catalina 27, and though we really liked our Catalina 27, we never considered it might be a boat used to sail around the world. Fortunately, I didn't say something really stupid, which I'm often inclined to do, like that guy must have been really nuts, because we found out the next day that that guy was Patrick.
After that first meeting in 2008, we didn't see each other again for 10 years, and our paths crossed again in Malaysia on the other side of the world. And we had an opportunity then to spend more time with Rebecca and Patrick in Southeast Asia, and as well as along our route sailing across the Indian Ocean. And we have some really good memories of that time. I think on the last afternoon that we were together, Rebecca and I were feeding lemurs while Patrick and Rich were taking pictures and filming us doing that. So we said goodbye again in Madagascar as they sailed off to Tanzania, and we headed off to South Africa. But we want to...
And we're really happy that we had that opportunity to spend time with them, and with both of them, especially with Patrick, and Rebecca is still in our future.
Right. So rest in peace, Patrick, and we're really glad that we were able to share a small part of the world's oceans with you.
You are the consummate sailor, so I know you're off there sailing somewhere now.
Cheers.
Bye.
You know, one really remarkable thing about Patrick, and I think people will tell you about this whether they knew him 50 years ago or whether they knew him last year and everything in between, was that he was always ready to help other people, whether it be other cruisers or locals on land. He was always ready to help. Listen to some of these stories, and there's so many more I can't begin to tell you.
Hi, it's Leslie here, trapped in Melbourne by the COVID border closure while my husband Philip is on our boat Pacifique in Turkey. We first met Patrick and Rebecca in 2018, which was the first time that we crossed an ocean. We met in an anchorage in Sri Lanka, and we spent a couple of months there together. We met again a few months later when we were both in Chagos, which is an archipelago right in the middle of the Indian Ocean, very remote. And Philip and I certainly made a little bit of a spectacle of ourselves when we came into that anchorage while we were trying to get our anchor set. And Patrick was the first person to get in his dinghy and zoom over to see if we could use a hand. And it was just lovely to see a friendly and reassuring face right there to help us out if we needed it when we were in a spot of bother. in Chagos, sharing some really unique experiences in a very remote part of the world before we each left for our respective next destinations. Patrick and Rebecca on Brickhouse, heading for Rodriguez further south, and Philip and I on Pacifique, heading west to Madagascar. We never did cross paths again, but we kept our friendship up in the virtual sense, that's for sure. We had no idea what an experienced cruiser Patrick was, actually, until he died. He was such a humble guy who never got preachy about the experience and everything that he had had, but he was always willing to share his knowledge in a way that certainly didn't make us feel like dummies anyway, and that was very much appreciated. Like a lot of other cruisers, I certainly enjoy being on watch alone at night. I find it's very quiet and peaceful time. And it's at those times that I often find myself thinking about the people in my life who are no longer with us. And I'll be sure to be thinking of Patrick in those quiet, peaceful moments in the middle of an ocean somewhere. And I like to think that he would like that thought.
This is Susie and David off of the sail vessel Sidewinder. The life of a cruiser requires that you make friends quickly. You never know when they're going to sail out of the anchorage, and you might never see them again. When I first met Patrick, I didn't find this hard at all. Very quickly I was able to respect him not only for what he knew, but for who he was. He was the kind of guy that would drop what he was doing in the middle of a passage only to rescue a boatload of people, feed them, pull them all the way back to land, and doing so jeopardized his own fuel storage and food as well. He was just a good guy that was, that was a really positive part of the cruising community. We were lucky enough to meet him in Fiji, in the Yasawa Islands, the very first time, and ended up seeing him off and on all the way across that part of the Pacific, all the way to the Philippines and back down to Indonesia and Raja Ampat. And it was there in Raja Ampat that we finally said goodbye to him. They were going south, we were heading north, and but it was no big deal. We'd see him again, we always did. But this time we never did. And, kind of regret not heading south with them. But so be it. And I just wanted to say that I was proud to be able to say that, Patrick was a friend of mine. And I hope he's got a real easy point of sail, and he doesn't have to make any sail changes in the middle of the night. All right.
I am Susie, and my memories of Patrick are that he has an incredible sense of adventure and a very dry sense of humor, and was such a pleasure to be around. I remember one time when we were on a hike in Palau, and Patrick released a little turtle that had been tied up inside a small pond in a riverbed, and he released that turtle so that he could go back down to the ocean and grow up. We had a wonderful bike tour of Small Island, and I know we went to some really remote places there on Small Island because Patrick wanted to go on these amazing dirt roads, and it was really fun. And our last time with Patrick and Rebecca was so endearing. We were on this island, and it happens to be where this picture was taken. And we did an amazing snorkel, and I know that Patrick was out there finding all the little wonderful creatures that we would go look at. And we hooked up with some magical mantas, and Rebecca and I got to do a wonderful swim with them because Patrick and David were together in the dinghy and made that possible. And we spent our evenings on Brick House and Sidewinder just enjoying each other's company and sharing stories and laughter and cheers. And I will never forget those times. So my heart to everybody, a tribute to Patrick, who was very, very wonderful.
You're right, Susie. That was an awesome day. That was just such an awesome day made possible by our men. Yeah, thank God for our men. Thanks, Patrick. And you know, when you got off that boat with Patrick, you just be ready for an adventure. Make sure you're well fed, have water with you, have good shoes on, and you're ready for an adventure because you just never knew where things went with that man.
Patrick and I used to call ourselves the Magellans because we'd always go exploring and go on adventures together. One of the greatest adventures for me was a dive that we made together down to 140 feet. He convinced me it would be fun, and naturally he didn't stop at 140, he just kept right on going. Another great adventure we went on was down to the mouth of the Sakonnet River off Satchwist, where we went spearing blackfish together. It was awesome. When I think about him too, I also have a lot of gratitude for the fact that when I was going to school part-time to become a teacher, he gave me work with his company, Weathertight Construction. I learned a lot of do-it-yourself skills, so thank you, Patrick, for that. I picture him right now in heaven. He's probably added an addition to the place and then notified the administration that, as he loved to say, he was just getting started.
Yep, that's exactly what Patrick used to always say, whether it was our very first date on the ski slopes in Killington to our 10th anniversary celebrating it in Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. He was always just getting started. And yeah, wherever he is, whatever happens to you after it all finishes here on Earth, yep, he's just getting started.
You know, since my first memory with Uncle Pat was being picked up from school after living in England and moving to Washington and getting picked up in his little sporty RX-7 and, you know, hearing about him for 5 or 6 years from my mom and just all the tales she had told about him being a young man and everything he did regarding sailing and just living a life of adventure. And so after he picked me up, I remember going back to our home, and he gave us a slideshow of a lot of his adventures. And you know, I think it's partly, you know, it's from that moment on that he really became, you know, a part of me. And I think that he still lives to a large degree because he's instilled such a sense of awe, wonder. He's inspired, I think, me to a large degree to keep going, keep pushing, keep, you know, just going for life and really grabbing it for really what it's worth, because it's a damn short time we're on this earth, and I think he made the best of it. And you know, I really hope that I follow in his footsteps and do what, and you know, live a half of a life that he's lived, and I would be completely content. We need more human beings like Uncle Pat. The world would be a better place if we have more people, more humans like Uncle Pat. And so I just, you know, now that he's moved on, no matter what, I always loved him, will love him, and I miss you, Uncle Pat. I really want you to know that, you know, the world that you left behind is a better place because of you, and it's because of people like you that we can hold on to even during the hard times, and really know that there's a bright future out there for us. We just got to stick through it and stay strong. So I love you, Uncle Pat, and I'm sure I'll see you sooner or later.
In the Tuamotus, friends told us we had to meet Patrick and Rebecca. So how perfect that the day we arrived in Fatuhiva, Brick House did too. Patrick's adventurous spirit led us on lots of great hikes together, but the best part was when Patrick was sitting in Migration Saloon and we learned that Patrick had sailed a Catalina 27 around the world alone in the 1980s. You're the guy, I explained, as I had read about him way back then. Patrick and Rebecca put on all speed to arrive in Minerva Reef for an impromptu wedding. As soon as their anchor was down, Patrick was aboard Migration, asking what he could do to help. That was him all over. An image we cherish is Rebecca motoring around Minerva Reef while Patrick hung in the bosun's chair taking photos of the boat. The photo of Migration would become his first cover shot. Many nautical miles later in Borneo, our adventures continued. With long poles in hands, he guided our team on an exciting bamboo river race. Patrick was always up for a hike, no matter how muddy or challenging. So many adventures. Music festivals, cave exploring, hiking, birthdays, Halloween parties, or just hanging together at sunset. Patrick was always ready to go. Patrick showed no fear and never balked at a request for help from a fellow cruiser or a local. Patrick's handsome smile always looked the same through the years, and it was always looked especially happy with Rebecca by his side. We will miss you, Patrick. This video is from our friends Bruce and Aline on Sailing Vessel Migration. Thanks for your contribution, and thank you for everybody for yours.
Hi, this is Tim Queenie, editor of Ocean Navigator magazine. We're very sorry to hear about the passing of Patrick Childress in South Africa in June. He was such a great contributor to the magazine with his incredible breadth of knowledge and breadth of experience from his circumnavigation at age 28 to his work as a delivery captain to his current circumnavigation that he was undertaking with Rebecca. He had technical knowledge. He could very effectively work on any part of a boat, from the hull to the electronics to the rig, and that really came through in his articles. I like to think of one particular article that Patrick did for us, and it involved Rebecca and Patrick exploring a stream. They were anchored in a remote part of eastern Thailand, and they decided they wanted to explore the source of a stream. So they waded and splashed their way up the stream, having to bushwhack their way around several waterfalls till they got to the source of the stream, which is just a great little piece about voyaging and the voyaging lifestyle. Really, we'll miss Patrick, and all of our best to Rebecca.
My name is Keith Brower, and this is my wife, Mildred. We are here in the Philippines. I own the sailing yacht Catalina. I met Patrick and Rebecca a long time ago, 2007, 2008. It was in Roatan, Honduras. And we ended up going to Providencia, and then we went to Cartagena, Colombia. Going across the South Pacific to Asia. Then we crossed the Indian Ocean at the same time. We were in Chagos. We went to Reunion. We continued on, and Patrick and Rebecca went to a couple of other places in Africa and then to South Africa. By this time we were in Cartagena, Colombia, and Rebecca called me about Patrick being in the hospital. Patrick has been a good friend of mine for a lot of years, and so has Rebecca, and I'm going to go ahead and miss him. We did so many different things together, it's hard to pick out just one thing that stands out amongst everything else. You know, sailing in a dhow when we were in Madagascar, in Reunion, walking through all the mountain trails. I'm going to miss him. We also, I was there for their first wedding anniversary, and we were there for their 11th wedding anniversary. The last that we saw of Patrick and Rebecca, they had a special bottle of liquor that they only it had been given to Patrick when he started his journey many years ago. It was a very expensive bottle that had been given to him, and I'm honored that he shared it with me and Mildred. I'm going to miss him. Well, I hope to see Rebecca again in the future, and someday, hopefully I'll see Patrick again too.
You know, I think anybody that knew Patrick or ever sailed with Patrick would agree with me in that the sailboat at sea was second nature. I mean, he loved being out there. He loved sailing. In good weather, he was just so joyful. And in bad weather, he was just a natural. He knew what to do. It didn't bother him at all. He'd have shit-eating grins on his face the whole time. The worse the weather, the happier he was. You know, he once had a tape or a CD that he'd put on when the weather got heavy, and he'd crank the stereo, and it was called his over 40s music, not age. And it was cranking. He loved it. He loved the sea. He loved sailing, and nothing fazed him. You know, I trusted him more, probably more on the boat than I did in a car. He was just such a great sailor, and he really knew what he was doing, and it was just second nature for him. You know, even when there was a problem on the boat, he still loved it. He always said, you know, a boring passage was better, but I swear, when something broke on the boat, he'd have this grin on his face. And, you know, he used to say when we had, you know, any kind of big problems on the boat, he used to look at me and just smile and say, you know what, Rebecca? The only difference between adventure and adversity is attitude. He always had such a good attitude when things broke. You know, I remember when the mast came down, first thing he did was, Rebecca, get my camera. Crazy man. Anyway, yeah, he was a good sailor, good seaman, just amazing to sail with, and I'm so glad that I got to sail with him for so many years. Wish it could have been longer, but thankful for what I had.
First met Patrick about 15 years ago when I joined a NARC rally to deliver a Swan 46 from Newport, Rhode Island to St. Martin. And we're on our first night out, crossing the Gulf in what's probably the normal horrendous storm. So we're crashing around, and I was woken up about 3 in the morning when I noticed that Patrick was in my V-berth, had the floorboards off, and had his head stuck underneath the floorboards. And I woke up and said, oh, Patrick, what the hell's going on? And he's like, nothing, it's nothing. I thought, nothing. If there's nothing going on, why do you have your head under the floorboards in the V-berth at 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, as it turned out, the boat was leaking quite badly, and Patrick, of course, is trying to figure out where the leak was coming from. We visit each other wherever we are in the world where our paths cross. We try and hook up, and it's been a wonderful experience of my life to have known Patrick and considered him a friend, and I will miss him dearly and love him a lot.
It's Mike and Gay Lewis from Yacht Expeditus, and so we first met Patrick in Kudat in Borneo in 2015. In fact, the cat Lily first jumped on our deck to introduce herself to our cat Miming, and they exchanged a few words and didn't get on very well at all. But fortunately, we did get on well with Patrick and Rebecca. We had a good time there, walking, talking.
It's Christmas.
Christmas dinner, meals. Lots of meals out. Subsequently, we moved on to Penang. I think we caught up next. And it was the same thing all over again. Walks, talks, dinners, exchanging restaurants.
Views,
exchanging views on life and sailing and so forth and so on.
And there was also more entertainment there with Elvis impersonator and St. Patrick's Day. Patrick in St. Patrick's Day, Murphy's Bar, of course. very noisy. Patrick gave me an earplug, and because he suffers the same way with loud noises, so really thoughtful, and also with thoughtful and kind.
Leftover meals,
leftover meals. Any scraps they've collected, and then we'd go, and because Rebecca and Patrick knew the haunts of all the stray dogs, so we'd go and feed the dogs after we'd eaten.
So that was Penang, and much the same thing again in Langkawi, I think was our next get-together. And Patrick, amazingly, used to walk up to the waterfalls and
very fit.
Ponds every morning, and very fit, very healthy, puts us to shame. We came back from Phuket with a broken gearbox, and God bless him, Patrick met us just in the channel and pushed us through the anchorage into a marina berth, which Rebecca had arranged, and fantastic seamanship, and saved our bacon.
Yeah.
And then we parted ways. Great seaman, Patrick. He'd sailed around the world previously on a small boat, and then helped prepare Brickhouse with Rebecca, and a lot of work on the boat, always improving it. And they've had a great trip right up until Africa.
Videos.
Nature photography. Patrick did some wonderful photographs of animals, took the business very seriously, and the same with the YouTube. He started a YouTube program they both did, for good, solid, practical advice about sailing, how to fix things, no bulla, just straightforward, good, practical help, no showmanship or Instagram stuff. And that was Patrick all the way through. Just a good, solid person, good, practical advice for everybody, great seaman, great friend, and we're going to miss him desperately.
Yeah.
Vale, Patrick Childress.
Yeah.
Patrick, my friend, our friend, you were one of the greats. Pre-GPS to modern times, you were with it all. Always the nicest guy, happy to help anybody at any time. We met through our SWAN program. You met Rebecca through our program. We love you. Thank you for reminding all of us that it's not over yet. We will always remember you and be in our hearts. We love you.
Period, we knew you. You really impacted our lives. And so we decided we wanted to remember you forever. And so we have a bar stool in your name. Thank you, and hope to see you on the other side one day.
And the wonderful members of the Hout Bay Yacht Club in South Africa. This was the last location that Patrick was known as a healthy man, vital and full of vim and vigor. This was our last wave goodbye together and our last sail together as we headed to the Royal Cape Yacht Club. The Royal Cape Yacht Club is the place Patrick had waxed poetic about for a decade before arriving. Well, this was a tough video to do. You know, no poems that I can find on the internet, nothing that I can think of to write myself or say myself can possibly do this justice. He left too soon, he left too fast, and nothing can take that away from us. But, you know, I think that Patrick would probably appreciate the following reading as his last words of advice as a sailor. So I hope you can find some comfort in this. Live a life that matters. The author is unknown. Ready or not, someday it will all come to an end. There will be no more sunrises, no minutes, hours, days. All the things you collected, whether treasured or forgotten, will pass to someone else. Your wealth, fame, and temporal power will shrivel to irrelevance. It will not matter what you owned or what you were owed. Your grudges, resentments, frustrations, and jealousies will finally disappear. So too your hopes, ambitions, plans, and all the to-do lists will expire. The wins and losses that once seemed so important will fade away. It won't matter where you came from or on what side of the tracks you lived. At the end, whether you were beautiful or brilliant, male or female, even your skin color won't matter. So what will matter? How will the value of your days be measured? What will matter is not what you bought, but what you built. Not what you got, but what you gave. What will matter is not your success, but your significance. What will matter is not what you learned, but what you taught. What will matter is every act of integrity, compassion, courage, or sacrifice that enriched, empowered, or encouraged others. What will matter is not your competence, but your character. What will matter is not how many people you knew, but how many will feel a lasting loss when you're gone. What will matter is not your memories, but the memories that live in those who loved you. Living a life that matters doesn't happen by accident. It's not a matter of circumstance, but of choice. Choose to live a life that matters. Patrick, thank you for living a life with me that matters. Your strength, integrity, compassion, and courage is now combined with mine. In living with your memory, you will influence my life for years to come. Thank you for being my faithful and loving husband and best friend. I'll be forever grateful to you and will always, always have you in my heart.